Hi, welcome to the Thinkin spot and my first attempt at a Copic video tutorial. I'd like to start today by sharing a technique with you for coloring an image that is primarily intended to be white. I know many times I have been coloring either flowers, or in this case I'm working with the Trick or Treat Ghost from Peachy Keen Stamps. But the image is basically a white image. And usually when we think about a white image, we consider that the shadows are probably, in most cases, gray. But what I'd like to point out is that when you're working with a white image, the image certainly can be gray, as you would think it would traditionally be, but white will pick up whatever color you have with it. So if you've got a red background, then your little image, or in this case the little ghost, would pick up the colors of red from the colors that surround it. Here's a sample of one I did with green, and here's a sample of one I did with purple. So that's my intention to show you today, is that you can really think outside the box and pull in whatever color that you'd like when you're working with an image that's intended to be white. So for my demonstration today, we're going to go with blue. I'm going to start by coloring this cute little ghost with blue. And I'm not actually going to do coloring per se. I am going to start with shading. I'm going to use the feather blending technique, and I'm going to start shading in color in the places where I know there are going to be shadows. And for some of you that may have sat in on the tutorial at CHA with me, I talked a little bit about how a good place to start when you're thinking about where there's going to be shadows is where things touch. And when things touch, shadows are created. So I'm going around shadowing with the lightest color first, and I am using a B0000 in a Copic sketch marker. Then I'm going to go right to the second color. I'm going to move up, take two zeros off, get a little bit darker color in there with this B00. I'm going over the same areas I went over the first time, but I'm not quite pulling the color out as far as I did that very first time. And I'm working a little bit farther away from the image, so I'm not staying inside the lines very good, and that happens. Okay, I went over those same areas with the B00. Now I'm going to jump up to a B02. And again, the same thing, but I'm just not adding in quite as long a line or as long a brush stroke. Now you can see that I've gone through and I have shaded with my B000, and I've added in a little bit of a darker shade with the B02. Now I'm going to go back with my first color, the very lightest one, and I'm going to switch to the chisel tip instead of the brush tip. I always use the brush tip for my base coloring, and then I use the chisel tip usually for shading, except when I'm in a real tiny little spot. But I'm just going over those places and blending out the definite line. I want a much softer blended line. I don't want to have a harsh looking blend to it. One person that I was working with at CHA kind of described this as scrubbing. I said that was a very good description of what we're doing here. We're kind of taking that chisel tip and we're scrubbing those edges to soften them a little bit. It almost makes stamping sound like work. But you can see how that, or hopefully you can see how that softens the lines. So once I've got that done, I am going to pick up my colorless blender, which again is not a blender, it is an eraser. I'm going to soften out just a few of those areas where I might have gotten more color in a place where I really want it to stay more white. Just kind of blends or softens the edges a little bit. Okay, now you can see we've got our blend on it with the blues to a point where I'm pretty happy with it. So I will share with you how I add in cheeks. Cheeks are one of my favorite things to do. And my go-to color, one of my favorite colors for doing cheeks is naturally called blush, and that is number R20. And I'm going to start with that feather blending stroke right there on the line. If the artist gives me a line to follow, I always try to stick with that line, and Kathy has given us a great line there to follow with the cheek, so I'm going to follow right along with that. I blended the R20 and now I've got an R22. Again, I'm not going to go quite as far with the R22 as I did with the R20. Then I'm going to go back to my original R20 color and just soften the line between the two colors just a little bit. Then I'm going to pick up my trusty colorless blender and I'm going to go over that line between the R20 and the white, and I want to blend out that definite line. I want to make that nice and soft, and I want that cheek to blend right into the paper. So I'm not adding any additional colors in there, just those two, and blending that back into the paper a little bit. I pick up my R22 once more, and I'm going to give this little ghost a little bit of a pink tongue. And then we're going to move on to coloring the brown paper bag, and I'll give you a quick rundown of the colors I used with that. I usually have better luck if I outline an image first and then color in, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm working with an E31 marker, outlining all of that little brown paper bag, and then coloring it in, and we'll start shading with first an E33, and again I'm using that same feather blending technique, and start blending and adding in some shadows where I think areas of that bag are going to need to be darker, like the inside of the bag, and the handle, of course, where the ghost is touching the bag. Okay, there's my first shading color, and I move up two more colors to the E35, and I see kind of a little bend in the bag, so that tells me, just from eyeballing it, that it's going to be darker there in the bend. So I add a little bit more of my dark color there than I do in the other areas. And finally, I'm going to give it just a touch of an E37, and again in that area where I know there's going to be a more definite line, or need to be a definite line between light and dark. Now I'll go back with my chisel tip and start blending those colors together, being careful not to saturate my paper too much with the lighter color ink, because again, when you're working in small areas like this, you can cause it to bleed outside of the stamped image, and you don't want that because you have to spend a lot of time with your eraser cleaning that up. So I'm pretty happy with the way that looks, and the only other thing I would add at this point is something that is just my personal preference. Some people will tell you that this isn't right, or they've been told they can't or shouldn't do this, but I always like to add just a little bit of a white sparkle to the cheeks, the eyes, and maybe a little sparkle there on the tongue. Just here and there. That comes from my toll painting days. Something I like the way it looks. I think it gives it a finished look. And then the final thing that I do to all my images is create a shadow around the edge. And my favorite color to do that with is BG10, which is Cool Shadow, and it just adds a nice little finished touch to your image. It kind of makes them pop off the page, gives them a little more of a 3D look. And since this ghost is flying, we won't need to add any ground or anything underneath it. Just a little shadow around the edges is all it will need. Okay, and this one is officially finished. I'd like to thank you for stopping by today, and I look forward to the next time sharing some more of my favorite coloring techniques with you. And until then, I wish you a beautiful day and lots of happy stamping. Bye.